It was another scorcher of a day in western Thanalin. The guards that normally stood watch over the entrance to the Copperbell mines listened closely as they heard the faint clang of steel on stone coming from deep within the network of tunnels below. An Au-Ra had come by a few moments ago and politely asked for passage into the old mining tunnels. She had a slender frame, but it was hidden by armor befitting a dark knight. Her pink hair was braided, going across her head like a headband, which left the rest of her hair about shoulder length. Closer to the ends, the pink hair transitioned into a sort of cream color, matching the white horns on the sides of her head quite nicely, as well as the slender, scale-covered tail that swished slowly back and forth. Typically, the mines were closed off to anyone who approached, on account of all manners of dangerous monsters that still lay within. As uncommon as an Au-Ra is in these parts, however, anyone who's anyone around here would recognize Verena when they saw her. One of the most notable adventurers of the realm, whatever the mines contained were surely no match for her. Naturally, they let her pass unimpeded, as they were reassured it would be only a moment before she returned. "Would you just hold still?" Verena shouted in annoyance as she swung her greatsword vertically towards the pink slime in front of her. However, before it could hit its mark, the slime split in two, before merging together again to the left of where the sword had taken a chunk out of the stone floor of the cavern. It ducked a horizontal slash that followed up immediately, before bouncing up over the sword on the backswing and landing atop the wide flat part of the blade as the edge sliced through the air. Verena just stood there in shock for a moment as the slime bobbed back and forth on the blade. Was it playing with her? "Look, little guy, I'm sorry, but you're kind of the last ingredient I need, and I really must get going. No hard feelings, but playtime is over," the Au-Ra said, letting out a sigh as she plunged her sword straight down into the ground. The slime jiggled on the blade as the sword hit the ground, before dark spikes erupted beneath Verena's feet and shredded the slime to bits. Thankfully, the gooey pieces were still stuck to her sword, and no longer moving, she was able to just prop it up against a wall to retrieve what she needed. She knelt down and, holding up a vial to the blade, scraped what remained of the pink slime off her blade into the container, before corking it shut and placing it back into her bag. As she hopped on the lift back towards the entrance, she pulled a piece of paper out from her bag and unfolded it. Looking it over carefully, she double-checked that she had obtained all the necessary ingredients, or at least the things she couldn't get easily from a market on the way home. 2 tufts of cloud mallow, grown by the Mughals of Mogholm, a vial of liquid from the caverns of the moon, or mare lamentorum as the creators of the recipe would probably insist on calling it, alongside a lunatender blossom that she could get on the same trip. Age-flow ether sand to mix in as an alchemical compound would have been a pain to gather, but thankfully one of her party members, probably her best friend, had been willing to provide that for her from their own stash. The final piece had been the slime, mousse, whatever you wanted to call it. That part wasn't really that hard. More so coming out here just felt so out of the way, though she supposed that was partially her own fault for being so particular. As the lift continued upwards and she ran over the ingredients list and directions she would be preparing for, she thought back to a few days ago when she started this ingredient scavenger hunt. Her group had been relaxing and eating dinner at the Last Stand, a restaurant in Old Charlayan after an exhausting mission that sent them to the depths of Labyrinthos. The scholars had needed help wrangling up some monsters that had been attacking an etheric reactor close to the research base. It wasn't overly dangerous, but Verena had felt absolutely exhausted afterward. She discussed getting too old for all of this with the group, and how fatigued she'd been after even simple quests now. She would give practically anything to get a bit of that youthful vigor back. "Sorry, I couldn't help but overhear, but I might be able to help," came a high-pitched, somewhat squeaky voice from near where the group was sitting. It was Cookingway, one of the Laporits that had come from the moon and was now staying in the city. "I've been working on all sorts of recipes since coming here, food and potions alike. I think one of them may be of use in exactly this situation. A youth potion, to be more precise," the small bunny figure said, ruffling its ears before smiling up at the group. "A youth potion? I've never heard of such a thing, at least not one that was ever successful. Have you gotten to test it yet?" Maple, a Makoti to Verena's right, asked curiously. Maple brushed a bit of her light brown hair out of her face, before the cat-like ears atop her head wiggled with curiosity. She was the group's healer, and Verina's best friend. Well, no, I haven't gotten to test it yet, but I'm quite positive it will work flawlessly. It wouldn't have been possible just with materials you've had access to here on the planet. But with some things from the moon, it should be a simple matter, Cookingway said enthusiastically before continuing. If you'd like to give it a shot, here's the ingredients list and the instructions for brewing. If you do give it a try, I would absolutely love to hear about the results. The sprightly figure said with a happy smile, rubbing its cheeks happily before waving goodbye and walking back to the counter near the kitchen. It didn't take long for the lift to reach the top and snap Verena back to reality. All in all, it was a pretty quick trip. It had only been about 10 minutes after she had entered the old mining tunnels, and now she was stepping back out of the entrance shaft into the sunlight. Realistically, Verena didn't even need to come back up. She could have just teleported out and been on her way, but it would have been rude to keep the guards waiting. She imagined they wouldn't close the gate again without seeing her out as well, and depending on what creatures below caught wind of that, the 2 to 3 guards probably wouldn't be able to stop the monsters from escaping if they so wished. All right, boys. Thanks so much again for letting me through earlier. Told you I wouldn't be long, Verena said with a smile while the largest guard shut the gate behind her. She tucked the ingredients list back into her bag and began teleporting away, before her thought was interrupted. What exactly brought you all the way out here, if I might ask, ma'am? I've not heard of anything particularly rare or notable down in the tunnels for quite some time, the Lalafell guard asked curiously. The question caused Verena to laugh, as the reason she came all the way out here for a slime was really quite silly. It's a little embarrassing, to be honest, but I recalled seeing a pink slime the last time I was down there, which is quite a peculiar color for such a creature. I'm working on a new potion, and since the color would be derived from the mousse used in the formula, I figured I would try to find the pink slime again to use as an ingredient, Verena explained, laughing nervously a little as she reached up and messed with her hair. The guards let out a chuckle as well. The idea of someone risking their life, at least relative to what they could handily take on, over something so simple as a potion color was somewhat amusing. Verena waved to the guards once again and bid them farewell, before concentrating on her home once again and beginning to teleport to the aetheryte that sat in her yard. As she thought about her house, she shut her eyes, and she was pulled through the ethereal sea, before popping back into existence standing in her front yard. She walked over towards the front door and found a package sitting on the ground, waiting for her. She picked it up and opened the door, heading inside to get started. Without missing a beat, she put her sword down at the door and took off the heavier parts of her armor, headed straight over to the kitchen area, put the package down on the counter, and got out her alchemical supplies. She emptied her bag out, laying all of the ingredients that she had gathered carefully out onto the countertop to her right, before turning to the package that was at her door. She untied the ribbon that was around the box carefully, before opening it to find a card inside. It read, "Dear Verena, if you got the rest like you said you would, this should be everything. Bottoms up. Come find me at the house as soon as—" Oh my gosh, there's no way. This is hilarious. I mean, I guess it worked then, didn't it? Look at you, you're absolutely adorable. Who's a cute little baby? You are. Maple shrieked through howls of laughter as she slapped her knee. It had taken a moment, but after the initial scare of being seen outside like this, Verena had nervously rushed into the house. Thankfully, nobody else was home at the time, as she quickly made her way to Maple's quarters, where she found the Mikote lying on the couch and reading a book. Unfortunately for Verena, she forgot that she still had the pacifier in her mouth, so while she tried to hide her outfit, that was enough of a dead giveaway for Maple to jump into action and drag her into the room. "It's not funny, Maple, it's serious," Verena exclaimed, removing the pacifier from her mouth and stamping her feet in a huff. Maple was her best friend, and Verena knew she didn't mean anything bad by all the laughter. Still, though, she was standing before Maple in the most infantile baby dress she could imagine, with a puffy pink diaper bulging out from beneath it. It was a bit hard not to feel at least a little embarrassed, even if it was Maple. "I mean, it's a little bit funny, Vari, but okay, let's try again. From the top, what happened?" Maple asked, her laughter settling down as she got a bit serious. "Come on over here and tell me about it while I get a closer look," Maple continued, beckoning Verena to come stand in front of her instead of staying in the doorway. Verena double-checked that the door was locked behind her, before nodding nervously and heading over to stand in front of Maple while she began explaining. Starting from the moment she got home, she went over everything in as much detail as she could remember. Recounting the ingredients list and the recipe off the top of her head to perfect accuracy, she moved on to explain the potion-making process. Maple simply nodded as she ran her hands down Verena's sides, feeling the fabric of the dress to see if anything seemed out of the ordinary. Verena continued, describing the consistency of the potion and how it looked, alongside the smells, before moving on to the dreamlike experience she had once she'd drunk the whole thing. While Verena kept telling her story, Maple turned her around gently to get a better look at the diaper that was taped securely around her friend's waist. Giving it a couple of pats, the garment crinkled slightly beneath her touch, while a puff of baby powder seemed to come out from where it met Verena's thighs. Verena blushed once again as she felt Maple examining the diaper and lost her train of thought. "Maple, please. It's embarrassing enough without you touching it," Verena mumbled, looking over her shoulder to see her friend smiling and giggling as she patted the diaper. "I'm just examining everything to get an idea of what we're dealing with. Continue, please," Maple replied, giggling once again. Verena sighed but continued, explaining what happened when she had tried to remove the diaper, causing Maple to spin the Aura back around to get a closer look at the tapes in the front. Maple nodded as if she was making some mental notes as the story finished. Verena sat down beside her friend on the couch, and that's when she remembered what she'd noticed as she was teleporting over. "I also wasn't sure about it until just now, but we used to be the same height. I seem to have gotten a little bit shorter, too," Verena mentioned absent-mindedly, staring at the top of her friend's head. She figured she must have shrunk a good 4 or 5 inches. Hopefully, it wouldn't end up being more, but she didn't feel like she had gotten any smaller while she spent the time explaining the story. Maple looked over at her and nodded again, before grabbing the pacifier that Verena had taken out of her mouth once Maple pointed it out. The cat girl looked it over in her hands for a moment before smiling and popping the pacifier straight back into Verena's mouth. Verena suckled it unconsciously, but stared back at her friend, clearly unamused. "Well," Maple began, "I can confirm a few things at a glance. Firstly, this is all real. Your diaper, your pacifier, the dress, all of it. None of it is fake or a glamour from what I can tell, which is fascinating, especially considering how you talked about another one just appearing out of the ether around you," the Mikote said, once again reaching over to feel the soft fabric the ruffles of the dress were made from.